LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the March 17th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out the weekend 17 for March 17th, 17 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. The political comedy source I will be using is HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher from Friday. I have one comedy clip from the monologue, and then I actually have a few clips of of Bill Maher's interview with Andrew Gillum, which is part of my second two topics. I actually have three topics listed. If you look down in the video description, they are White House too white as the main topic, then the 2020 Democratic presidential candidates as a second topic, and then two clips at the end on turn the Supreme Court up to 11, or what some people call packing the court, increasing the number of Supreme Court justices. That'll be a clip of Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, and Andrew Gillum talking about that topic. But like I said, the main topic is White House too white, and that has to do with this shooting in New Zealand, which you'll see some coverage in the Big Five corporate outlet news summaries. By the way, the rest of my clips, besides the HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher clips, come from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. If you want to follow along my clip list, I have 17 clips with my sort of cryptic notes. There's a link down in the video description to that. And there's a link down in the video description to Bill Maher's monologue, where he doesn't really talk about the White House too white, which is whether the Trump administration is reacting strongly enough against the threat of white supremacy and far-right neo-Nazis. And, you know, the shooting in New Zealand was anti-immigrant, white nationalist, anti-Muslim. And I will get to all of that a little later in the video. But a couple of the news summaries were more about the Democratic candidates for president in 2020, especially NBC News's Meet the Press and CBS's Face the Nation both had news summaries on that topic. And that was also one of the topics in Bill Maher's monologue. And I was going to start off the show with a few jokes about Beto O'Rourke getting into the race. And I will have a clip from NBC's Meet the Press of Chuck Todd's interview with Beto O'Rourke. But this is Bill Maher making fun of the large Democratic field of candidates for president in 2020 over in this clip.
We have a new candidate. Beto got in the race. Beto O'Rourke from Texas. Now there's 15 candidates. Trump is already calling them a caravan. And I mean, so many options. That's pretty. I feel like a stoner looking at the menu board at Taco Bell. I mean, there's just so much to choose from. But, you know, I must say, Beto was pretty popular a while ago, and now it's all been greeted with a white guy. Suddenly the I don't see color people see color. You know, white, black, who cares? Let's stop orange. And come on, think of the matchup, Beto and Trump. Oh, my God. Instagram versus Telegram. iPhone versus payphone. No, some interesting parallels between Trump and Beto. As a teenager, this is true. Beto belonged to a computer hacking group called the Cult of the Dead Cow. And as an adult, Trump belongs to a computer hacking group called Russia. All right.
And the one thing Bill Maher covered there that was not covered in any of the news summaries you're going to see or on the news shows, except I think they briefly talked about it in one of the panel discussions, was how Beto O'Rourke belonged to this Cult of the Dead Cow hacking group when he was in high school, which for me, it gives me a little bit of solace that, and I'm not a big Beto O'Rourke fan, as I'll talk about a little bit more later, but that whole Cult of the Dead Cow thing actually is almost a positive, because to have a president who was involved in a hacking group and understands computers and the internet, that would be a big step up from the president we have right now, who I don't think understands very much about internet hacking, although I think he knows. No one knows more about technology than he does, I believe, is one of the many quotes where he bragged about his immense knowledge on many subjects. But I'm going to now show you 5 different news summaries from the 5 corporate outlets, and you'll see a couple of the news summaries focused on the Democrats, and then a few of them focused more on what happened in New Zealand and the president's response and whether it was strong enough against white supremacism. But the first 2 from NBC and from CBS are all about the Democratic candidates. And I've talked before about how these news programs have a bias for covering their exclusive guest. Well, NBC's Meet the Press had Beto O'Rourke as their exclusive guest, so they're almost, you'll see this is a 4-minute, 23-second news summary about the Democrats, but it's almost all about Beto O'Rourke, and I think that may have been biased by the fact that they are the ones who got the exclusive interview with him in Iowa, which is, I'll show a clip of it later, but this is more just like NBC gushing about Beto O'Rourke. Too much, in my opinion, as I will discuss a little more after we watch together. Let me see. Let me look at my notes here. Was there anything else I was supposed to say about this before I show it? It ends with the Biden clip, and here you'll see one thing I like about, they do gush about Beto O'Rourke, but they also point out his lack of specifics in a few different ways, and that's my biggest criticism of him, which I will discuss with you after you watch this 4-minute, 23-second news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press this morning over here.
Well, good Sunday morning and a happy St. Patrick's Day. The race for the Democratic nomination has been going on for some time now. But Beto O'Rourke's announcement on Thursday, fairly or not, seemed to signal that the starting gun, at least in the campaign part of it, had just gone off. There have been a handful of eagerly awaited candidacies in recent history that matched the frenzy preceding O'Rourke's announcement. Ted Kennedy was the presumed Democratic frontrunner in 1980 against President Carter right until he announced. Nearly 3 decades later, a first-term senator named Barack Obama rode his pre-announcement enthusiasm all the way to the White House. And twice the prospect of a Ronald Reagan candidacy generated huge Republican excitement. In 1976, when he lost the nomination to President Ford, and then again in 1980, when he won the presidency in a landslide. Already, O'Rourke's candidacy, along with the adoring Vanity Fair cover story that came with it, has inspired comparisons. Is O'Rourke the gifted political athlete in the image of Reagan, or a bright lights flame out like John Edwards? This much we know. However O'Rourke's candidacy ends, it's beginning in the full glare of a fascinated media.
We will either make or break the future of this country.
In Iowa this weekend, trailed by crowds and cameras, Beto O'Rourke is making it official. He's running. After an early morning announcement,
I'm running to serve you as the next president of the United States.
That glossy Vanity Fair cover story declaring, I'm just born to be in it, and the expected attacks from the president.
A lot of hand movement. I've never seen so much hand movement. I said, is he crazy, or is that just the way he acts?
While other Democrats run on signature policy proposals, O'Rourke is betting on a national unity message and largely avoiding specifics.
I mean, if you have all the answers, why show up? If you're not ready to listen and to learn, then what's the use of campaigning?
He was once for Medicare for all. On Friday, he backtracked.
I think that's one of the ways to ensure that we get to guaranteed high-quality health care for every single American. I'm no longer sure that that's the fastest way for us to get there.
And he declined to say whether President Trump should be impeached.
I leave it to Congress, where the power resides in our Constitution.
One thing O'Rourke did make clear, he plans to run to the right of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren on economic issues.
I consider myself a capitalist.
He will be pressed to answer why an increasingly diverse party should select a white male nominee, and is responding to criticism after these comments in Iowa about his wife.
My wife, Amy, is raising, sometimes with my help, Ulysses and Molly and Henry.
Not only will I not say that again, but I'll be much more thoughtful going forward in the way that I talk about our marriage, and also the way in which I acknowledge the truth of the criticism that I have enjoyed white privilege.
Other 2020 Democrats are already raising money off of O'Rourke's new candidacy.
I am delighted that we have so many Democrats who want to take on President Trump.
The more the merrier.
do you have any comment on Beto O'Rourke getting into the race, Senator?
Free country, anybody come on.
At a Democratic Party dinner on Saturday night, the last major holdout in the race, Joe Biden, nearly slipped up and declared himself a candidate a bit early.
I'm told I get criticized by the new left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
Biden clearly arguing electability as Democrats debate whether the 2020 race is about ideological transformation, generational change, or simply who can win.
The most electable progressive. Okay. But the progressive part of it's important.
How important is electability to you?
It's huge.
Oh, good. Well, yesterday I was in Waterloo, Iowa. It's good to be back there, and I managed to grab a few moments with O'Rourke on his first weekend of campaigning. O'Rourke's presidential campaign kicked off roughly 4 months after his 2.5-point loss to incumbent Senator Ted Cruz, which yesterday was one of his favorite applause lines because it is one of his best cases he could make because it was the best showing a Democrat in a Texas Senate election had ever had in decades.
When I heard you say up there you came 2.5 points short, I was thinking, what if you hadn't? Would you be in Waterloo today?
I might be in Waterloo.
So I think I pretty much described that clip there before you watched it. That even though there was a part there where they talked about Beto O'Rourke's lack of specifics, it was still pretty gushing. And I was reading my live comments along the way, and it didn't seem like there were a lot of Beto O'Rourke fans, at least amongst my live viewers. And I mentioned that I have some problems with his lack of specifics. And I'll talk about that a little more when I show a clip of him and the interview with Chuck Todd a little later. This next clip, it's not the beginning news. CBS's Face the Nation didn't have a beginning news summary, as they often don't have. But Margaret Brennan, a little later in the program, came back from a commercial and introduced a Ed O'Keefe news story on the Democratic presidential candidates. But there's something kind of weird at the beginning of this clip I'm about to show you. It starts off all dark before Margaret Brennan thinks her mic is live. She says something. It's a Democratic election. Is that what the? It's she starts off saying Democratic presidential. And then there's like this big sigh. I don't know if she can't find her. At first I thought she just couldn't find her place and what she was supposed to do next. But I don't know what the big sigh is all about. And that's right at the beginning of this 2-minute, 23-second news summary from CBS's Face the Nation, introduced by Margaret Brennan after her big sigh, and then going to their reporter Ed O'Keefe, which covers a lot of this same stuff you saw in the much longer NBC News Meet the Press news summary. It includes the Biden slip last night about how he's one of the candidates running or who could be running or whatever. Although it also talks about some news on the Republican primary front at the very end. But listen to this weird live mic mistake from Margaret Brennan at the beginning of the clip over here.
Democratic presidential. There are two more candidates in the presidential race, but it's one who is not in the race, at least yet, who raised eyebrows when he accidentally made a slip in a speech last night. Our Ed O'Keefe reports.
The man many Democrats are waiting for sure sounded like a presidential candidate Saturday night.
I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the anybody who would run.
Former Vice President Joe Biden is expected to make it official next month.
That's why I'm running for president, and it's why I'm asking you for your support.
New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand today became the 14th Democrat to officially launch a presidential bid, even though she's been basically campaigning for the job for 8 weeks. Gillibrand plans to formally kick off her campaign next Sunday outside Trump Tower in New York. Other candidates traveled to early primary states this weekend, hoping to build support.
That we have common pain all over this country, but we've lost our sense of common purpose.
And Beto O'Rourke wrapped up a 3-day tour of Iowa that launched his campaign.
This is my first time to ever visit Iowa.
O'Rourke narrowly lost a U.S. Senate bid in Texas last year, and presidential buzz has been building ever since. His rollout was treated like a major media event. He told Vanity Fair magazine for a cover story, I'm just born to be in it. And he sat for his first in-depth interview as a candidate with CBS This Morning co-host Gayle King.
Do you consider yourself more moderate or more progressive?
Yeah, you know, if I think about a term like progressive, I want to make sure that everybody has a chance, that our democracy fully reflects the genius of this country, that we make the investments in one another, and that's universal guaranteed high-quality health care. It's a living wage for everyone who works. It's supporting those who are looking for jobs. So if that's progressive, I'm a progressive.
You're a progressive.
Yes.
All right. All right. So I don't even need to go into moderate then.
Meanwhile, former Florida governor and 2016 candidate Jeb Bush said this weekend that Republicans ought to be given a choice, suggesting someone needs to launch a primary challenge to President Trump. He named Maryland Governor Larry Hogan as a possible option. Hogan told us a few weeks ago he isn't ruling it out. Margaret?
So, like I said, that was the CBS Face the Nation news summary, also about the Democratic 2020 presidential candidates. Did you hear that weird thing at the beginning I talked about? And like I said, at the end, they also covered Jeb Bush saying someone should run. Of course, not me, not low-energy Jeb. He's not going up against Trump again, but maybe Larry Hogan, governor of Maryland. You know, I know Republicans right now are saying that they will run against Trump, but that's one thing that could change when the Mueller report comes out. If it makes him look bad enough, then that will really increase the chance he has a primary challenger, I believe. But you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. So those two news summaries were about the Democratic presidential candidates. The next three news summaries from from CNN, ABC, and Fox News are all on my main topic of Trump too white, or it's really the New Zealand shooting, the anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim shooting in New Zealand, and whether when Trump was actually asked about it, and whether there was a threat from white nationalism, and what he's kind of minimized the threat from white nationalism, and that's covered in the first two news summaries, not so much the third one from Fox News Sunday, where they don't really cover Trump's response. They don't cover the reference to Trump as a symbol of the white identity movement in this shooter's manifesto. But I'll talk about the third news summary from Fox News Sunday after the first two I'm going to show you, and then after the three news summaries, I'm going to compare the way Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday questioned the acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney about whether Trump is a white supremacist or supports white nationalism, and then compare that to the way Margaret Brennan questioned Mick Mulvaney on the exact same topic, and the clips are almost exactly the same length. They're both like 4 minutes 46 versus 4 minutes 47 seconds. So it'll be almost 10 minutes of Mick Mulvaney struggling to get out from under the white supremacy criticism of the Trump administration, and I'll have a lot of things to say about that after I show you these three news summaries on whether the White House has not been strong enough in its denunciation of white supremacism, of white nationalism, and its reaction to this shooting in New Zealand that killed, I think it was at 51. Is it up to 52? I didn't see the latest number, but over 50 people killed by this white nationalist, sort of Trump supporter in New Zealand that I'll talk about a little more. First, after we watch CNN's State of the Union, their news summary, where the State of the Union, according to Jake Tapper, is disgusted and horrified after another white nationalist terrorist. Well, you'll hear it for yourself, and I'll talk about it a little more with you after we watch that 1 minute, 16-second clip together over here.
In Washington, where the State of our Union is disgusted and horrified after yet another white nationalist terrorist attack. There are now at least 50 people dead and as many injured in New Zealand after a horrific terrorist attack on two mosques. Overnight, the Prime Minister of New Zealand promised to take up gun reform, saying, quote, "There will be changes to our gun laws." In the United States and around the world, the tragedy is reigniting questions about rising white nationalism after a so-called manifesto, purportedly from the suspected gunman, spewed anti-immigrant hate and white supremacist ideology. In the hours after the attack, President Trump condemned the killings, but he did not notably offer any direct words of support to the Muslim community here in the United States or abroad, and he did not speak out specifically against white supremacy or white nationalism. In fact, when asked if white nationalism is a growing threat around the world, the president said this.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems.
When the New Zealand Prime Minister was asked if she agreed with the president's comments, she said, quote, "No." And statistics and data in the United States and around the world are with her, not with the president. Joining me now, the U.S. ambassador to New Zealand, former Republican Senator.
And that's former Republican Senator Scott Brown, who is the Trump administration ambassador to New Zealand. And he said all the right things, unlike Trump minimizing the threat from white nationalism, which I will continue to talk about, especially when I get to those Mick Mulvaney clips that I previewed before I showed that clip. I thought that was a good news summary from Jake Tapper, and it was fairly succinct. It's exactly the same length, a minute 16 seconds, as the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary, clip number 5, if you're following along on your clip list here. And it basically puts I would say it's almost identical in length and in the coverage of Trump and the way he's downplaying the threat from white supremacy in reaction to the shooting in New Zealand, as I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. As we come on the air this morning, New Zealand is reeling from the worst massacre in its history. It was an unprecedented act of terror for that peaceful island nation, but just the latest evidence that the global terror threat is not contained by borders or restricted by ideology. Islamic terror now increasingly matched by its mirror image, an emboldened and angry movement of white nationalists and neo-Nazis. And that threat has hit home here in the U.S. 11 worshipers killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh last October. 9 gunned down at the Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston back in 2015. The 2017 Torchlight protests in Charlottesville that ended with the killing of 32-year-old Heather Heyer. On Friday, President Trump downplayed that threat.
Do you see today white nationalism as a rising threat around the world?
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
Our Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas starts us off. And Pierre, the killer in New Zealand is so close.
And the Pierre Thomas report was also worth watching. As usual, you can see all the sources of my clips down in the video description. I'm adding my fair use media criticism and political commentary to these clips, so I shouldn't have to deal with warnings like the copyright warning I just got from YouTube here. So that's happened before. I hope my stream doesn't get cut off here because I'm using copyrighted material from the big 5 corporate outlets and also from HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. You notice YouTube doesn't tell me what it is that which clip it is that's setting off their alarms, and whatever clip it is, I think I am, my clips are about 42 or 43 minutes long, and I believe that this program, this live stream, is going to be about 90 minutes long, so it'll be more my commentary and criticism than the copyrighted material that I'm commenting on and criticizing. So boo YouTube. Why are you giving me these, why are you making me think about these problems when I'm actually trying to think about important issues like white nationalism and white supremacy? And you saw that George Stephanopoulos created a little bit of more of a context there about what happened in Charlottesville, and actually I saw this video from Scott Adams in the last day where he was claiming that, or he was creating this like false memory narrative that, oh, you know, Trump never sided with racists in Charlottesville. And it starts off with this like straw man argument where people have these false memories that Trump said that neo-Nazis and white nationalists were fine people. And he didn't say that. He said that the people marching with the neo-Nazis, some of the people marching with the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists in Charlottesville were fine people. And he talked about, you know, because they were trying to preserve the legacy of the Confederacy, which is, of course, also racist. And anyway, that whole controversy is a non-controversy in my mind, especially one of the things Scott Adams didn't really take into account when he was claiming people have this false memory. I think they have kind of a compressed memory because it was a few-day horrible thing that we all lived through, where first Trump came out and said that there were blame on many sides for what happened in Charlottesville. Then he came out and read this like statement that someone had written for him, and he seemed like really didn't want to read it. And then the third thing that he came out was at Trump Tower when he was with Elaine Chao, and that's where he came out and said that the people who marched with the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis, there were fine people on both sides. And it went back to his original mistake about the many sides comment. And when you compress all that together, you end up with like a memory that Trump kind of sided with the white nationalists and the neo-Nazis, even though he didn't specifically side with them. He sided with the people who marched with them. And anyway, I wanted to mention that before I get to the Fox News Sunday news summary, where you'll see Chris Wallace turns it over to Ryan Chilcote to give actually the most extensive news summary, both of what happened in New Zealand and the Shooter's Manifesto, except they kind of leave out the part where he praised Donald Trump, which kind of comes up in the clip I'll show you after the news summary, the Chris Wallace cross-examination of acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney about Trump being too white supremacist. But before I get to that, here is 2 minutes, 22 seconds from Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace and their reporter Ryan Chilcote giving a very extensive summary about the shooting in New Zealand, but not the praise of Trump over here.
Again from Fox News in Washington. The massacre at two mosques in New Zealand is raising new questions about white supremacist hate and the role of inflammatory rhetoric on social media. The suspected gunman appears to have been motivated by anti-Muslim and anti-immigrant ideology. And the horrific crime is an ugly reminder of attacks on houses of worship in this country. In a moment, we'll speak with White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. But first, let's get the latest from Ryan Chilcote, reporting from London.
In New Zealand, a traditional dance in honor of the 50 killed in the country's worst ever terror attack. On the streets of Christchurch, families grieve. Authorities say they're now returning the victims' bodies to the families. The 28-year-old suspected gunman appeared in court Saturday, his face blurred under the judge's orders. Under scrutiny, the Australian's extensive travel to Turkey, Bulgaria, and Pakistan, and the 70-plus page hate-fueled manifesto he posted online just before the attack. In it, he claims this 2017 terrorist attack in Stockholm, when a truck was deliberately driven into a crowd, killing 5, changed him. Investigators are also looking at its similarities to a manifesto written by a Norwegian neo-Nazi who killed 77 people in 2011, and the attacks on the Tree of Life Synagogue and the Charleston church shooting. The suspect had 5 firearms, all of which he acquired legally. New Zealand's Prime Minister says that's unacceptable.
We cannot be deterred from the work that we need to do on our gun laws in New Zealand. They need to change.
The Prime Minister's office received the suspect's manifesto via email just 9 minutes before the attack. And that was, of course, just before the assailant used Facebook Live to broadcast his attack for a full 17 minutes. Now, Facebook has issued a statement. They say that they removed a full 1.5 million videos of the attack in the ensuing 24 hours, and they say that they're removing all of the videos, even those that have been edited to remove the violent scenes out of respect for the family. Chris?
Ryan Chilcote reporting from
So, like I said, that was a pretty extensive report, and it did include the context of Charlottesville and the shooting in the black church, and it also, so I couldn't really fault it for not giving all those facts. It even talked about the shooter's manifesto and a lot of things that happened in New Zealand that you didn't hear in the other reports. It just left out the part where the shooter praised Donald Trump as a symbol of white nationalism, and that actually did come up in the next clip I'm going to show you. It's one of two clips of cross-examinations of the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney. I'm going to let you compare the one from Fox News Sunday with the one from CBS's Face the Nation, and I think Margaret Brennan ends up looking a little bit better in this clip, in the comparison of these two clips. One is 4 minutes 46 seconds long, the other one is 4 minutes 47 seconds long, although the second one has a little bit of an edit because it includes a reference to Jeanine Pirro, who this weekend her show did not show up on Fox News because last week she criticized Ilhan Omar for wearing a hijab and claiming that means she's against the Constitution, by which I mean, here's the Constitution of the United States, if you're wondering. So her show didn't air this week, and that's something that was brought up on CBS's Face the Nation, never brought up on Fox News Sunday. Chris Wallace did a pretty good job, I think, of cross-examining Mick Mulvaney on this issue of white supremacy in the White House and Trump's support or failure to criticize white nationalism and anti-Muslim violence. But I would criticize Chris Wallace both for not bringing up the whole Jeanine Pirro issue that you'll see in the next clip, but also I think at the beginning here, you know how I criticized the news summary for not mentioning the shooter's praise of Donald Trump. Even when Chris Wallace finally brings it up here, he doesn't completely quote what the shooter said about Donald Trump. He shows the first part where he praises Trump as a symbol of white identity and nationalism, or that's a paraphrase, but he leaves out the part where he says, as a policymaker and leader, dear God, no, I do not support Donald Trump, is basically what the shooter said. And that leaves Mick Mulvaney an opening to not say policymaker, but say that he didn't support Trump's policies. But that's not actually what the shooter said in his manifesto. And I will talk about that a little more. And the rest of what Mick Mulvaney said here on Fox News Sunday, talking to Chris Wallace after we watched that 4 minute, 46 second clip together over here.
In his 74-page manifesto, the shooter wrote this. I want to put it on the screen. Are you a supporter of Donald Trump as a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose? Sure. What does the president think of that?
Yeah, in fact, I'm a little disappointed you didn't put up the next sentence, which the next sentence, because I looked at it last night, was, what about for his policies and as a leader? And he said, dear God, no. I don't think it's fair to cast this person as a supporter of Donald Trump any more than it is to look at his sort of his eco-terrorist passages in that manifesto and align him with Nancy Pelosi or Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. This was a disturbed individual, an evil person, and to sit and try and tie him to an American politician of either party probably ignores some of the deeper difficulties that this sort of activity exposes.
I want to make it clear. I take your point, and I want to make it clear. The only person responsible for this slaughter is the shooter, not President Trump. But some critics have said that he has contributed over the years to an anti-Muslim climate. Here is one of his statements from the campaign.
I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred.
And after the attack, Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand tweeted this: "Time and again, this president has embraced and emboldened white supremacists, and instead of condemning racist terrorists, he covers for them." And some folks were disturbed that after we saw the manifesto, after the shooting, which said that he was doing this to kill, quote, invaders, the president said this when he was signing his veto message.
People hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. It's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people.
I understand, and I very much agree that the president is not responsible for this action, but has he considered, given the fact that some people seem to feel that he has given them cover, has he considered giving a major speech condemning anti-Muslim, white supremacist bigotry?
You've asked a couple of questions. So let's go back and talk about what Senator Gillibrand said. Look, there's folks who just don't like the president, and everything that goes wrong, they're going to look for a way to tie that to the president. So they see the word invaders in the manifesto, they see that passage, and they say, oh my goodness, there must be some connection between this. That's just absurd to say that there's some type of connection between being against illegal immigration, which is what the veto was about, for legal immigration, and the ruthless live streaming of murder of 15 people. The two things have nothing to do with each other. So I recognize the fact.
Let's forget all of that. To the degree that there is an issue, but let me just ask, to the degree that there is an issue with white supremacist, white nationalist, anti-Muslim bigotry in this country, and there is an issue with that, why not deliver a speech condemning it?
Right. You've seen the president stand up for religious liberties, individual liberties. The president is not a white supremacist. I'm not sure how many times we have to say that. And to simply ask the question every time something like this happens overseas, or even domestically, to say, oh my goodness, it must somehow be the president's fault, speaks to a politicization of everything that I think is undermining sort of the institutions that we have in the country today. Let's take what happened in New Zealand yesterday for what it is: a terrible, evil, tragic act, and figure out why those things are becoming more prevalent in the world. Is it Donald Trump? Absolutely not. Is there something else happening in our culture where people think, you know what, I think today I'm going to go on TV and live stream me murdering other people? That's what we should be talking about, not the politics of the United States.
If I may, all I'm saying is the president speaks out about a lot of things that he's not responsible for, and he doesn't feel that there's any link. Terrorism. Why not make a speech and make it clear that there is no place in America for this kind of hatred?
Well, I think you saw that yesterday in the tweet. I mean, the president, not sure what more you want the president to do. You may say you want to give him a national speech to address the nation. That's fine. Maybe we do that, maybe we don't. But I think you get down to the basic issue is that the president is doing everything that we can to prevent this type of thing from happening here. The president is doing everything that we can to make it clear, look, this has to stop. The work that we do, including, as I mentioned at the outset, with our Kiwi friends, to prevent this happening is the very central part of defending this nation, which is how the president spends a great deal of his time. So, look, it's a tragedy, and I get that. And we're in a hyper-partisan sort of time in the country, and I get that. But that doesn't mean we need to marry these two events.
Okay, let's move to another subject. You were...
So, like I said before I showed that clip, I mean, I pretty much criticized that clip and told you what I thought was wrong with it. But I also want to juxtapose it with this Margaret Brennan clip from CBS's Face the Nation. Like I said, next clip is 4 minutes 47 seconds long, 1 second longer than the last clip, though it includes a little edit where Margaret Brennan added this like special extra note that the person she was talking about at the very end of the first clip that I edited together with the second clip. The person she's talking about is Jeanine Pirro on Fox News, who apparently, I mean, I don't know if she's gone forever or if she's just gone for a week or why she wasn't there this weekend, but she did claim that wearing the hijab means you can't support the U.S. Constitution, and Fox News even put out a statement saying that violated their standards, which is, and to violate Fox News standards, that's pretty bad. And anyway, Margaret Brennan actually did bring that up at the very end of her questioning of Mick Mulvaney, and I thought she did a little bit better job than Chris Wallace. The one thing Chris Wallace did that she didn't do is he actually showed clips of Trump saying things that were anti-Muslim, but you'll see Margaret Brennan quotes those same statements. She just doesn't show the clips. And anyway, I'll talk about that Margaret Brennan cross-examination of Mick Mulvaney on Face the Nation a little more after we watched it together. But, I think this one is later in time than the Fox News Sunday clip, because you'll see Mick Mulvaney talks about how, like, some people are asking Trump to give a speech, and I think he's referring to what Chris Wallace asked him in that last clip. And you also see he's really primed to say, you're blaming Trump for what happened in New Zealand, even though Margaret Brennan doesn't say that. And Chris Wallace, I was going to criticize him in the last clip for being so, like, I'm not saying Trump is to blame. I'm not saying Trump. He said that like 3 times, and Margaret Brennan doesn't say it. So, of course, Mick Mulvaney immediately brings up, are you blaming Trump? Or I don't want people to blame Trump, even though Margaret Brennan's initial question here is actually, has President Trump been briefed enough on the threat of white nationalist violence, which is actually a good question, which Mick Mulvaney doesn't answer very much, and goes to the don't blame Trump mantra much too quickly, I think, over in this clip.
I want to get right to it in the wake of this horrific terror attack in New Zealand. There's a lot of parsing of the president's own language in referring to what happened here. Broadly speaking, a number of attacks and support for white supremacy is up, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And even a Trump-appointed attorney in the state of Virginia, Thomas Cullen, was recently quoted as saying, white supremacy and far-right extremism are among the greatest domestic security threats facing the United States. Has the president been briefed on this?
I don't know who that gentleman is. Certainly the president's briefed on all of...
You know who the Southern Poverty Law Center is?
I do. The president's absolutely briefed on all of the threats, both domestic and international. But I want to push back against this idea that every time something bad happens everywhere around the world, folks who don't like Donald Trump seem to blame it on Donald Trump. I'm hoping we can get...
I'm not blaming it on the president. I was asking about his characterization.
I didn't say you. I'm saying that that's clearly what some folks want to do. I've heard other members of the Democrat Party trying to do it, folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center here trying to do it. This is a tragic thing that happened in New Zealand.
They're just saying the number of white nationalist groups has surged by 50%.
Since Trump has become office, right?
Well, in the past year.
There you go. So here's the point. Why can't we...
So you disagree that it's a rising threat?
I disagree that there's a causal link between Donald Trump being president and something like this happening in New Zealand.
But that's not the argument or the suggestion there, by the judge or by that statistic. Is the president aware that this is a rising threat?
Again, a rising threat. I think the president, you saw him asked the other day, does he think it's a rising threat? And he says, no. I think there's information that would back that up. The issue is, how do you stop these crazy people? Whether or not there's one of them or 4 of them doesn't make a difference if they're willing to go on live TV and stream the murder of people. So I think that's where the time is better spent. Instead of worrying about, well, who's to blame? How do we stop from doing this? Donald Trump is no more to blame for what happened in New Zealand than Mark Zuckerberg is, because he invented Facebook. There are some terrible people in the world. We need to work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Well, President Trump, and certainly during the campaign, talked quite a lot about the need to be specific, to name a threat in order to counter it. So why minimize it? Why not directly address white supremacy and specifically Islamophobia?
Yeah, I get a lot of questions
because a number
about...
of world leaders did, and the president didn't.
I get a lot of questions from people saying, well, you need to tell the president to do X. You need to tell the president to go and give an Oval Office address on this or on that. That's not how the system works. The president communicates in his way. Different presidents have communicated in their way. I don't think anybody can claim that Donald Trump hasn't done exactly what we would want him to do in this circumstance. We've immediately reached out to our allies. We've expressed the absolute disgust at the tragic events. We're doing what presidents are supposed to do. That doesn't mean that it's going to make everybody happy because of the hyper-partisan times we live in. But again, it frustrates me just as a citizen that every time something goes wrong around the world now, not just in our country, somehow the President of the United States must be responsible. And that's absurd, and it doesn't help contribute to the dialogue that's necessary to fix these problems.
Point taken, but the President of the United States carries a megaphone louder than anyone in the world, and arguably this president likes to use his. So because you're frustrated, why not remove any shadow of a doubt? I mean, during the campaign, as you know, as a candidate, the president called for a ban on all Muslims entering the United States. He said Islam hates us. This kind of language in the past leads to these questions of why isn't the president now directly using that megaphone to condemn it?
Well, then take the words and put them in one category and take the actions and put them in another. Something the president doesn't get hardly any credit for or any attention to is the work he's done in defense of religious minorities all around the world, up to and including Muslims in the Middle East. Some of the religious minorities that are the worst oppressed in the Middle East are some of the ones that this administration has been going to great lengths to protect. So I hear what folks say, oh, Donald Trump said this during the campaign. Look at what we've done while we've been here. And I don't think anybody could say that the president is anti-Muslim.
Well, the president's tweeting now about a TV host who was suspended for anti-Muslim rhetoric. So it's, I think, a fair question to ask you about this. But I want to move on to one of the fights that is going on in Congress and question. Just to clarify, that host is Fox News' Jeanine Pirro. The network has condemned her commentary, and her broadcast did not air last night.
So what do you think, viewers? Did Margaret Brennan do a better job, or Chris Wallace do a better job of who wore it better? And by wore it, I mean wore Mick Mulvaney better, and by wearing Mick Mulvaney, I don't mean actually wearing him as like a skin suit, you know, a la Silence of the Lambs. No, I mean who wore him down better on the issue of white supremacy and Trump's support for white supremacy and white nationalism, which it's a thing. I think I did a video just in the last, one of my Sunday live clip roundups was is Trump racist? And I even included links to New York Times, to a New York Times list of long history of racist conduct from Donald Trump. So I don't even know why that's an issue anymore. And Mick Mulvaney there, his defense, I don't think anyone could say that Trump is anti-Muslim because he defends religious liberty, including in the Muslim world, up to and including Muslims. What does that even mean? I don't even know what that even means. But speaking of what does that even mean, that was a question that was asked of Chelsea Clinton in this next clip on this same topic about the Trump reaction, or the various reactions to the New Zealand shooting. One weird reaction, in my opinion, was at New York University. A Muslim woman confronted Chelsea Clinton for enabling this New Zealand shooter and his Islamophobia, because she had criticized Ilhan Omar, this new freshman member or fresh person member of Congress, who is a woman of color and also a Muslim, and she was criticized for being anti-Semitic in some of her statements, and so Chelsea Clinton was one of the people who criticized her, and so this NYU student confronted Chelsea Clinton about enabling Islamophobia and therefore enabling this New Zealand shooting. And that is a clip that Jake Tapper showed to another Muslim member of Congress. This is Rashida Tlaib, and she responds to it not by criticizing the people who confronted Chelsea Clinton, and I have some criticism for those people, although, I mean, it's free speech, and it's not like the worst thing in the world ever to happen to Chelsea Clinton. Hillary, I don't know why I said Hillary, but it's not the worst thing in the world to ever happen to Chelsea Clinton, and so I'm not criticizing it that harshly. It's just that if you're going to criticize people for enabling Islamophobia, Chelsea Clinton is like not anywhere near the top of the list. It's more like, well, but when it comes to Rashid Tlaib's defense of Ilhan Omar and defense of people who might criticize Chelsea Clinton, I don't have much to criticize what Rashid Tlaib said in response to Jake Tapper in the another clip that's about, I showed you a clip that was 4 minutes 46 seconds, a clip that was 4 minutes 47 seconds. This clip is 4 minutes 45 seconds long from CNN's State of the Union about whether there's a double standard when it comes to Muslim women of color saying things that might or might not be anti-Semitic. And if you want to hear more of my views on what Ilhan Omar said and the anti-Semitic tropes, I talked about that last week in my Sunday live clip roundup about Democrats being divided. And this is also kind of about whether Democrats are divided because Rashid Tlaib also talks about Islamophobia on the Democratic side in the last part of the clip that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Was confronted by an NYU student at a vigil for those killed in New Zealand this weekend over the way that Chelsea Clinton, had condemned recent comments from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. Take a listen to this confrontation.
After all that you have done and all this Islamophobia that you have sowed. I'm so sorry. Well, certainly it was never my intention. This right here is the result of a massacre stoked by people like you and the words that you have put out into the world. And I want you to know that, and I want you to feel that deep inside. 49 people died because of the rhetoric that you put out there.
I don't know if you could hear that. It's a video that's gone pretty viral. But basically, this NYU student is saying that because Chelsea Clinton confronted Ilhan Omar, Congresswoman Omar, in the way she did, that the massacre is partly her fault. I don't know if you saw it, but I'm wondering what your response is.
Well, I know, Congresswoman Omar and myself have gotten so many death threats. I think she is probably, really, I actually pray every day for her safety. I can just tell you the kind of public disagreement and the kind of language that sometimes is being used towards disagreeing with her on a number of fronts, foreign policy issues. People need to be very careful. She's become very much a target. And right after not only the West Virginia, poster, putting her face there with the 9/11 towers in the background, this is a woman that is a mother, that is an American, that is serving her country. And we need to be very careful when we disagree publicly. When we disagree publicly on various policy agreements, we have to be very careful in the language that we use. And I can tell you, look, I have seen the letters and have seen the various posts from not only from Republicans, but also Democrats, that when we target or disagree, we need to be very careful and that it's not feeding into the Islamophobia that is growing in our country.
It's interesting that you raise that because before the attack in New Zealand, you had said something about Islamophobia in relation to Congresswoman Omar and her comments about Israel supporters that I want to ask you about. You were asked why Democrats responded so strongly to her comments about supporters of Israel, and this is what you said.
This past week, I feel, and I know this would be somewhat shocking for some, but I think Islamophobia is very much among the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party.
Obviously, we condemn all Islamophobia. I'm sure you and I would agree on that 100%. And the poster of Congresswoman Omar, the death threats against her, all of that is reprehensible. But are you suggesting, just help me understand here, are you suggesting that Democrats who took issue with Congresswoman Omar's comments did so because of anti-Muslim bias?
I mean, I think that's part of it. But let me tell you why. I've been there only for a short period of time, and there are members on the other side of the aisle that have been very, very using various tropes and regarding against my Jewish brothers and sisters, using different kinds of. I mean, they've so-called tweets and different kinds of rhetoric that they support, and many of those are the same people that support this president, who doesn't want to condemn white supremacy in our country and white nationalism that is growing. And I want to say, this is what I saw is this double standard. Is it because she's a black Muslima? Is it because it's around the issue of human rights violations from the country of Israel? I don't know, but I can tell you if it was really about anti-Semitism and condemning that, then we need to be able to say to all the members, and that's what we ended up at the end, condemning all forms of hate, but also holding every single person accountable to the same standard. And that's what I didn't see. And that's when I think to myself and pause, as a person that ran a racial justice campaign for years, who grew up in the most beautiful, blackest city in the country, in the city of Detroit. I mean, I pause and think to myself, is it because she's a black American and she's Muslim? And so that's where I pause and say to myself, is there an issue here? And I guess our mere presence there, the fact that now there's not only one, but now 3 Muslim Americans serving in Congress, that our mere presence is going to be able to possibly break down any of these kinds of racialized, opinions, this kind of Islamophobia that I do feel like is still very present on both sides of the aisle. And I think my colleagues are not seeing that as an attack, as a saying that we just have a lot of work to do.
But you don't think that though?
And Jake Tapper went on to question Rashid Tlaib a little more about which Democrats might be Islamophobic, but I think that was a long enough clip. I saw someone in the live comments along the way saying, who cares how long the clips are? Well, apparently YouTube does, because I got another one of these warnings. Apparently YouTube thinks I'm playing copyrighted material for too long a period of time, and those were the longest clips. Basically those last 3 clips were all 4 minutes 45 seconds long, plus or minus a couple seconds. So none of the rest of the clips are that long, and so hopefully, oh wait, no, there is one 5-minute clip with Amy Klobuchar coming up as clip number 15, but hopefully I will get through this with my commentary. My political commentary and media criticism will be enough to get me through the use of copyrighted material, despite what YouTube algorithms might be focusing on for reasons I don't quite understand. But I have 2 more clips I want to show you on this whole White House too white topic and the New Zealand shooting, but it's on a little bit different aspect of what's people have been saying, and you kind of heard it through some of the news summaries and newsmaker comments where they're kind of blaming Facebook. You heard Mick Mulvaney say, Trump's no more to blame than Mike Zuckerberg for inventing Facebook. And there was some criticism of the technology involved, not just the guns, but the use of social media to promote this shooting in New Zealand. And I'm going to show you 2 clips on that. The first one is from NBC News' Meet the Press, and this is Chuck Todd interviewing Senator Pat Toomey, but this isn't really about anything Pat Toomey says. It's about the way Chuck Todd frames the question, and I'm not, a huge critic of Chuck Todd. I don't think he is as bad as apparently a lot of my viewers do, according to the comments I read many weeks. But in this case, I think he is too much shilling for his employer. Xfinity Comcast, owns NBC, and he says, how can Facebook get away with live streaming something that this shooter's 17-minute, live stream of his dastardly deed in New Zealand? Because if Xfinity Comcast did, showed broadcast this violent content, we'd get in trouble with the FCC. Well, that actually is not completely accurate in terms of what Xfinity Comcast does. I mean, I'm broadcasting right now a live stream using my internet access from Xfinity Comcast. So they are not just... Chuck Todd seems to think that all they do when they broadcast is broadcast NBC News and MSNBC, but no, they broadcast anyone who wants to hook into Xfinity Comcast internet access, which is what I have. And that's my criticism of the question, not so much the answer, from Pat Toomey from Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning. Over here.
What happened in New Zealand, and I want to ask about it in terms of rhetoric. You know, the president offered condolences to the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and her ask back to him was, can you essentially say better things about Muslim communities around the world? When the president uses the term invaders, does that dehumanize to the point where it can get misused? I mean, it is not healthy for anybody, for these crazy people to be citing our president of the United States in their manifestos.
Yeah, Chuck, look, I have often disagreed with things the president has said and the things that he has tweeted, but I think it's a long way to attributing any kind of real link between what the president might say or tweet and the extraordinary type of madness that leads someone to massacre people in large numbers, whether it's in Pittsburgh at a synagogue or whether it's in New Zealand.
Let me ask you this. You brought up Pittsburgh because this person also seemed to get a little more fired up on the internet, on the dark corners of the internet. Let's be honest here, Senator Toomey. If this person had used NBC's airwaves or Comcast's equipment to push out his manifesto and to push out that killing, the world of hurt would be brought down on us by the FCC. There are regulators out there. These internet companies have done nothing about this. They wait till after the fact. And do we need to do something to treat these companies as media companies, that Facebook would get held as responsible as any broadcast media company would?
You know, I mean, it's a big, really important discussion, Chuck. I'm not sure where we come down on this because, as you know, in many cases, these companies are really aggregators, and they are not, you know, they don't have their own news departments per se. In some cases, they don't have their own editorial boards, and so they're aggregating messages and they're providing a platform. And this is a new, very, very important challenge for us. I don't think there's an obvious or easy answer.
All right, Senator Toomey, I will leave it there. Republican from Pennsylvania. As always, sir, thanks for coming.
So Chuck Todd is pretty clueless there about the way Xfinity Comcast actually is an internet service provider, and I think the old, like, dinosaur media doesn't quite understand the way that the new internet media even works, and I think Chuck Todd's comment there is pretty indicative of that. I have one more clip on the White House too white topic, also on the topic of how, or the subtopic of the liability or responsibility of the internet companies for what appears on their platforms. And this is, you know, normally I don't show pundits. The newsmaker, or the pundit actually, in this next clip is Tom Bossert. He is an ABC Homeland Security analyst. He used to be the White House advisor on Homeland Security, so he's a former Trump administration official who now works for ABC as a pundit, as a consultant to talk about Homeland Security issues. And the only reason I show it is because he's attacking my show. Tom Bossert is saying the response to this shooting in New Zealand that was live streamed on Facebook means, well, we shouldn't let anyone live stream anything. There should be a delay because there's no benefit to live streaming. And I will criticize this next clip. I'll give you two benefits. One, it's happening right now. I'm reading your live comments and reacting to them in my live stream. And if you can't live stream, if there's some sort of mandatory delay, you can't interact with your viewers. And I see that not just in my live stream, I see it in activist live streams, like these protests recently in Sacramento after the district attorney decided not to charge the officers who shot Stephan Clark almost exactly a year ago. It'll be a year ago tomorrow that shooting took place, where these Sacramento police officers shot this unarmed black man who was just holding a cell phone in his grandmother's backyard. And anyway, during the protest, people live stream it, and because it's not delayed, it actually draws more activists to come to the protest, and it lets the people who are live streaming answer questions from people who can't show up but can only watch on the internet. So there are a lot of really good benefits both for activists and also for my show. And Tom Bossert, this pundit, former Trump administration Homeland Security advisor, can't even think of those benefits in this 52-second clip, final clip on the White House too white, Trump administration white supremacist reaction to the shooting in New Zealand. Anyway, here's Tom Bossert talking about how we have to delay live streams over here.
Tease out there. Let's get to it one at a time. And Tom, let me start with you on the second point that Mr. Johnson brought up, this role of social media. You know, one of the most chilling things about this attack, it was up for 17 minutes on Facebook before it came down. We're really seeing here Facebook and YouTube becoming force multipliers for a terrorist act. What do we do about it?
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. And I think the difference between content, which is hard to monitor and police, and video traffic might need to be explored a little here. And I've thought about this quite a bit, George. I think it might be time to think about delaying or forcing those providers to delay live broadcasting or live streaming. There's a lot of benefits that can come from individuals broadcasting from their telephones, but there's no negative or downside to forcing some delay into that broadcast. It'll require some time and money, but I think it's something that we should consider.
And is that something you think can be done, Mr. Johnson?
And if you want to see Jay Johnson's answer to the George Stephanopoulos' follow-up question, click on the link down in the video description to ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I'm not going to show the rest of that, but that was pretty disturbing that anyone would think that the answer to the shooting in New Zealand is to stop people from being able to live stream. In fact, the fact that being able to live stream, it's almost like I feel like I should be making the same argument that Second Amendment gun rights enthusiasts make, that, you know, guns are just a tool, and it's the people who make them or who use them to do evil things who are evil, not the guns. But I would kind of say that about live streaming, that like being able to live stream video on the internet is a very neutral tool, and it's actually useful for people to be able to connect to events that are anywhere around the globe at any time and gain information. And some of that information is going to be about evil acts, but I don't think that means that the tool is evil. It's the acts that the camera is pointed at that are evil. But that's just my opinion. You can let me know what you think down in the video description. Before I move on to the next topic, which is 4 clips on the Democratic 2020 presidential candidates, I want to thank the Super Chat contributors so far. I've gotten some good contributions here. So that's really nice, especially because I don't get a lot of advertising revenue from YouTube between the copyright claims and the demonetization for daring to talk about things like the New Zealand shooting and white supremacy and white nationalism. And I don't know whether there are going to be ads in this video or what's going to happen, but I appreciate those people who support my videos more than YouTube advertising through the Super Chat contributions. And there are also links down in the video description to support my videos and the Sunday live clip roundup every Sunday. I especially appreciate that $50 contribution, catching up on supporting my commentary and criticism and compression of the Sunday news coverage on the Big 5 corporate outlets into this condensed, hopefully will be around 90-minute format this week. Like I said, usually my commentary and criticism is about twice the length of the clips. So that was the last clip on the White House too white Trump reaction to the New Zealand shooting topic. Now I have 4 clips on the Democratic presidential candidates and then 2 clips on the Supreme Court and whether we should pack the court by adding justices, and my personal idea of turning the Supreme Court up to 11. That'll be the last 2 clips from Andrew Gillum and Pete Buttigieg. But the next 4 clips, we've got Beto O'Rourke, 2 Andrew Gillum clips, and then an Amy Klobuchar clip to round out my Democratic 2020 presidential candidates. The first one is a little over a minute long. Chuck Todd asking Beto O'Rourke about why he is going to be a uniter, which is like the only specific, how specific is that? I was criticizing Beto O'Rourke before about not really having any specific policy positions, but he takes the great leap, he takes the great political risk of saying he wants to be a uniter, not a divider. And Chuck Todd asked him why Obama said that and then wasn't successful, and his answer doesn't really even attack the Republicans who tried to make, like Mitch McConnell trying to make Obama a one-term president, and of course the racism in the Republican Party that wouldn't let some members of that party accept a black president. That you won't hear any of that from Beto O'Rourke in the, like I said, just over 1 minute answer to Chuck Todd's question over here.
Ambitious goals that we have. You're not the first candidate to say, I'm going to bring this country together. Most recent Democratic president, a lot of people put their hope in and thought he was the answer that was going to do that.
Yeah.
Why do you think that didn't happen in Obama's 8 years? What was hard, and why do you think you'll be able to do it?
Yeah. I don't know. I know that President Obama worked incredibly hard to find common ground with Republicans and Democrats alike, took a message to the entire country. But I'll say he was able to achieve a heck of a lot in those 8 years. Domestically, you look at the Affordable Care Act and millions of Americans who lead better lives, many of those lives saved because of that legislation. In foreign policy, you prevented Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. And there were little and perhaps smaller victories along the way. All I know is that everyone I've met, the most partisan Democrat, the most hardcore Republican, wants to see us come together, and they want to make sure that we get something done. They don't want the perfect to become the enemy of the good. And as I shared with someone earlier today, if we wait until we're in office to begin this work, it will be too late. It has to start now in the way that we campaign.
You have admitted that, hey, you're in a part of...
So that's Beto O'Rourke, like not attacking Republicans. Some people say he's kind of right-wing. He is a Texas politician, so to be successful in Texas, you have to, as a Democrat, you have to be kind of middle of the road, and he seems to be trying to avoid saying anything of substance there. Unlike, I think, this Andrew Gillum clip I want to show you. Well, there are actually 2 Andrew Gillum clips. The first one is Andrew Gillum responding to Beto O'Rourke's rollout, saying kind of like he is the cult of personality without a lot of substance. This is a short clip, and then it'll be followed by a 3-minute or so clip of Andrew Gillum not talking about Beto O'Rourke, but talking about some other issues. But here's Andrew Gillum's response to Beto O'Rourke's big announcement on Bill Maher's program, Real Time, on HBO last Friday over here.
But look at the way in which she's been covered up to this point. I mean, we've seen a lot of people say that a woman candidate or a candidate of color would not be covered in the same way in which.
Yeah, that's probably true.
So there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. But I'm not gonna, hit the guy on that. What I want to know is, what do you stand for? What do you believe in? This cult of personality is not interesting to me. I'm mostly interested in what are your beliefs and how you're gonna make this country better for people.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a obtuse criticism of Beto O'Rourke from Andrew Gillum, but I don't know why Andrew Gillum isn't running. He has as much of a credential as Beto O'Rourke or Pete Buttigieg, since Andrew Gillum was also a mayor. I don't know why no one's asking him to run for president. I actually kind of like his answer, both on the impeachment question and then on the capitalism versus socialism question that I talked about last week. And here's Andrew Gillum's response to those two questions, talking to Bill Maher. And you can see Bill Maher's entire interview with Andrew Gillum at a link down in the video description. Here's just 3 minutes, 8 seconds of it that I'll discuss with you after we watch it together over here.
So Nancy Pelosi this week, I'll read her statement on impeachment. Unless there's something so compelling and overwhelmingly and bipartisan, I don't think we should go down that path. Now let's break that down. Compelling, it certainly is compelling.
Right.
Overwhelming, definitely overwhelming. It's just not bipartisan. I must tell you, I've been for impeachment, but Nancy Pelosi knows a thing or two.
Yeah.
We got to get that issue right.
Yeah.
So when Beto announced this week, they said, well, he flip-flopped. He said we should impeach, and now he doesn't know. Yeah, we got to think this through. That's not flip-flopping. Let's get this one right. Where you stand?
Well, I mean, I ran also on impeaching the president. I think Donald Trump is uniquely unqualified for the job that he holds. I think the president has broken the law. I mean, I'm not sure when it began, but we know for sure that he fired the FBI director because he wouldn't interfere.
But we also know for
justice.
sure that he wouldn't be convicted. So it would just be doing it.
Listen, all I would say is that you're elected to Congress, you're elected to the United States Senate to do your job.
Yeah.
All I want as a voter is for them to do their jobs.
Okay, what do you think about this question that all the Democrats are being asked now? Are you a socialist or are you a... Joe Scarborough asked John Hickenlooper. He would be one of your competition if you got in the race. He said, would you call yourself a proud capitalist? And Hickenlooper said, oh, I don't know. The labels, I'm not sure any of them fit. Is that hard to answer for you? Are you a capitalist?
I am a capitalist, but I'm also conscious that the rules of the playing field are not leveled right now. When you have the kind of wealth disparities that exist in this country, when you see small businesses in communities all across the country being snuffed out, quite frankly, because of the rules not being leveled for them, there's something wrong with that. And I think Americans know this. Donald Trump's biggest fear is that we're going to recognize, those of us who are in the working class of this country, that we actually got a lot more in common than we have apart, and that he actually is doing the bidding of the top 1% and not the rest of us. The candidate on the Democratic side who goes out and makes the case for working people around why it is they ought to believe in our party again, I think will be the one who wins. And that's not a racial comment when I say working people. I mean, working folks who get up every single day to make a living for themselves and their families need to know that we have their backs, first and foremost.
And we certainly have elements of socialism in our system, as do all modern democracies. But the system itself, you can't be afraid. I think if the Democrats are afraid to say I'm a capitalist, first of all, the jury's in. We had this debate in the 20th century. Capitalism, with all its flaws, and it does need regulation.
Absolutely.
Is still better than the government owning the means of production. We had this.
But I don't know anybody right now, and including Bernie, who is saying that the government ought to take over.
No.
Right? All elements of economic and otherwise.
But people hear socialism, and that's what they think.
Well,
it's because people don't understand what socialism is. It's the government ownership of the means of production. As Bill Maher said in the end of that clip, I talked about that extensively last week, how democratic socialism isn't really socialism because it's more about a robust social safety net and not government ownership of the means of production. And I don't want to reprise that entire argument, but I liked Andrew Gillum's responses more than pretty much all of the Democratic presidential candidates. One Democratic presidential candidate I've kind of liked is Amy Klobuchar, except for the fact that she's a former prosecutor. And as a former criminal defense attorney and public defender, I have great difficulty supporting a prosecutor because that's someone who's like in charge of the racist criminal justice system. And if you've been watching my live streams for the last almost 6 years, you'll know that the new Jim Crow has always been over my left shoulder, which is all about mass incarceration and the racist criminal justice system. If you want to know many facts supporting that brief labeling of our criminal justice system, just read that book. And Jake Tapper, to his credit, asks Amy Klobuchar about her record as a prosecutor. And he starts off talking about something, a study of the county that she was the prosecutor in right when she started, and then never really follows up about whether there was any improvement, which is my only real criticism of this questioning. And then he follows up talking about how Amy Klobuchar supported the drug war, and she kind of dodges that question. But the first part, she talks about all these great things she did, and I don't live in Minnesota, so I don't really know whether she's being truthful or not. I'm sure I have some Minnesota viewers or some people who are know more about Amy Klobuchar's record. It kind of reminds me of Kamala Harris. Here, she's the senator from California, used to be a prosecutor in San Francisco and attorney general. And when I hear her talking about her criminal justice record, I just hear her, saying things as like bullshit, 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 because I live in California and I know what she did. But I don't know that about Amy Klobuchar because I never lived in Minnesota. So if you know more about it, let me know if this is accurate or not accurate in the 5-minute clip I will talk about with you after we watch it a little more over here.
So let's talk about your record, if we can. From 1999 to 2007, you were the top prosecutor for the county that surrounds Minneapolis, Hennepin County. A study from around that time, from during your time heading that office by one of your predecessors, then with the Council on Crime and Justice, found wide racial disparities in the justice system at the time you took office. It preceded you, but they issued this report during your time there. Minnesota Public Radio wrote, quote, "The ratio of blacks sent to Minnesota prisons compared to whites is the highest in the country. People who are black account for 70% of Hennepin County's drug cases. If convicted, they are sentenced to time behind bars at 3 times the rate of whites guilty of the same offense." Now, that was data from the start of your term. When you were the county attorney, did you do anything to try to improve these broad, stark racial disparities? And if so, what did you do?
Of course I did, Jake. In fact, if you look at the data, you'll see there was a 65% decrease in incarceration of African Americans when you go from the beginning of my term to the end. And we worked very hard on several fronts. The first is to diversify the office and to add more people of color to the ranks of prosecutors, and I did that. The second was to look at how we were handling drug court and make sure that we were doing it in a way that wasn't racist. And you can always do better. I can tell you, you learn in retrospect when you look back things you can do better. The third thing was to up our focus on white-collar crimes. Things that are committed in the boardrooms are just as bad as things that are committed with a crowbar if someone's trying to break in a house. And so I really made a major effort on that. And then finally, I was one of the first prosecutors in the country to work with the Innocence Project to do a DNA review on our cases, to do something differently when it came to eyewitness identification. So you'd have the police officer who was not involved in investigating the crime show the photos, and you would show the photos one at a time instead of all at once. And then finally, we had videotaped interrogations in Minnesota. We were one of the only states that did it at the time to make sure that suspects were treated fairly, Miranda rights were being read, and we actually I remember debating the Queen's DA about that to defend that practice, to protect individual rights. So I made this a major effort because I truly believe that our mission is to convict the guilty, yes, but protect the innocents. And there has been racism in our system, and there still is.
According to the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, in 2004, you attributed falling crime numbers in Hennepin County largely to aggressive police attacks on drug traffic. In light of what we know about how, in general, crackdowns on drug crime exacerbate these racial disparities in the criminal justice system, you said, on this issue of drugs, you said there are always things you could do better in retrospect. What do you wish you had done better in retrospect?
Well, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we are starting to resolve is the federal drug sentences. And I was a sponsor of the First Step Act, a co-sponsor, And that was the important law that just passed on a bipartisan basis that brought down the federal drug sentences, which were much higher than the local drug sentences for nonviolent offenders. It's called the First Step Act because there has to be a Second Step Act, and that gets at what you're talking about, which is nonviolent offender drug sentences in localities all over the country. 90% of those nonviolent drug offenders are in prison, not in the federal system. So that's got to be the next step, is that in Washington, we create incentives for all of the local DA's offices across the country to reduce their drug sentences.
But that's what you're looking for.
And I believe...
What do you wish you had done differently at the time, though? I understand you're talking about what you want to do in the future.
Well, I would have looked at, I would have looked at those drug sentences and seen what we could have done differently at that time. That's one thing. We had as I said, we had to diversify the office. I did that. I looked at our sentences as much as every single case. Now, we had a huge office, over 400 employees, but I would try to make sure we were fair regardless of race. And I actually close to the people that ran the study that you talked about from the beginning of my term. And I had met with them and talked to them about that back then, and I knew the changes that we needed to make. Felony DWI, drunk drivers, a lot of those perpetrators were white, people with 20 DWIs. I made that a major purpose because I don't think you should have seen that differently than you did drug offenders.
Vice President Joe Biden, all but...
So, like I said, I kind of liked Amy Klobuchar after I saw the way she took on Brett Kavanaugh in those Judiciary Committee hearings, but I'm very skeptical of anyone who served as a prosecutor in the racist criminal justice system, and I don't really have enough background knowledge about Amy Klobuchar's history as a prosecutor to understand whether what she was saying in the first part of that clip was true, but she definitely tried to dodge the question about being a drug warrior by talking about what she's doing now in the First Step Act. So anyway, that was the last clip about the Democrats. You can let me know what you think about the Democratic candidates for president in 2020, and I assume this subject is just going to get larger and larger as the weeks go by. But I've talked. So this last topic is something I've talked about over many weeks. I've talked about making an edited, produced video advocating turning the U.S. Supreme Court up to 11, adding 2 justices to make up for what happened with Merrick Garland and then what happened with Brett Kavanaugh, which I kind of just talked about with Amy Klobuchar. But I want to show 2 clips on that. First, the Pete Buttigieg clip from Fox News Sunday, where I think he messes up the whole proposal for reasons I will talk about after we watch that 51-second clip together over here.
Court. You talk about possibly expanding the court from 9 justices to 15.
Yeah, but it's not just about throwing more justices on the court. What I think we need to do is some kind of structural reform that makes the court less political. We can't go on like this where every time there's a vacancy, there's this apocalyptic ideological battle. So one idea that I think is interesting is you have 15 members, but only 10 of them are appointed in the political fashion. 5 of them can only be seated by unanimous agreement of the other 10. There are other ideas that have been floated too about term limits or about rotating justices up from the appellate bench. I think we should have a national debate about what's appropriate, especially within the framework of the Constitution. But the bottom line is we've got to make some kind of structural reform to depoliticize the Supreme Court.
After Donald Trump's victory.
So what's bogus about that Pete Buttigieg proposal there is it's no longer just a legislative solution. If you want to change the way Supreme Court justices are appointed, if you read your Constitution, they're appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate right now. If you want Supreme Court justices like 10 to appoint the other 5, that would require a constitutional amendment that is a much harder process than just adding a couple justices, which in this next clip you'll see Bill Maher eventually figures out, talking to Andrew Gillum, Senator John Tester, and Jessica Yellin about, and Bill Maher doesn't like the idea from Pete Buttigieg about adding Supreme Court justices, but I think there's something to it, as I will discuss with you after we watch this final political comedy / news clip together over here.
What do you think of presidential candidate Pete? Oh, I can't.
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg. Thank you so much, because I'm going to
Edge.
Twitter will go nuts.
Edge.
Need a weird name this year.
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg. I like Budapest, but Buttigieg. What do you think of President candidate Pete's suggestion that Democrats pack the Supreme Court? That is what he is suggesting. Wow, FDR tried that. It didn't work so well. Don't know about that.
I will say, as just a shout out to the courts.
And how would it work?
I am here tonight with Norman Lear, founder of People for the American Way Foundation, legend.
Yeah.
And a great deal, I don't know where you are, Norman, but a great deal of that work happens to be around the courts and making sure we get good justices there, those who are not necessarily 100% in agreement with us every time, but are good judges.
Do we know how this works? I mean, the Supreme Court does not have to be 9. We always used to think that, and then when they started futzing with it, we learned, oh no, it can be 15, it can be 4. How would you pack the court? You would have to pass a law to say there are now...
It's a piece of legislation.
Yeah.
It's that simple. I mean,
It really is that simple?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a legislative change. I mean, I imagine this would be challenged in court, and so who knows what comes of it. But this is also one of the hallmarks of progressives versus moderates. Progressives are saying the system's so effing broken, we have to do radical things to change it.
You can say fucking...
Like,
yeah,
the training I have, it's just like 17 years.
But where does it stop? I mean, so we go from 9 to 15, and then the next party takes over in 15 to 27, and...
We're already halfway to a banana republic. We don't need to...
I'm not sure what banana republics have to do with it, and I don't think we should go to 15 or any. I think just adding 2 to make up for the Merrick Garland, Brett Kavanaugh outrages, and going to 13, that's going to make people, Americans who are superstitious, are never going to want to have 13 justices. So just go up to 11. That's my. I'm still planning on making that edited, produced video, so look forward to that. Especially for my patrons on Patreon, I should be giving some sort of preview for that. There's a link down to that in the video description. Also, you can support my videos on PayPal with a direct contribution. And before I finish, I do want to give my bonus Dash and Sandy clip for the Dash and Sandy fans out there. This is Dash and Sandy coming down, is this 15 seconds coming down the hallway? I hope this isn't like sideways over here. Well, sorry, I guess it was sideways, so it was a sideways Dash and Sandy clip, but that's the end of the show. I will be back next Sunday and every Sunday for the foreseeable future to give my edited, commentary and criticism of the Big 5 corporate outlet news clips, and hopefully sometime I'll be able to give you my edited, produced video on the turn the Supreme Court up to 11 topic. And until next week, or until I have the ability to upload one of those edited, produced videos, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.